Hello and welcome to the Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTV World. A very famous philosopher once said that the question of animal rights doesn't accrue from whether they can reason or whether they can talk. It all accrues from whether they suffer, which we all understand that they do. Now, we understand the fact that animals, like human beings, they suffer from pain, they suffer from loneliness, they can even suffer from fear, so to speak. But the most unfortunate thing is that they are voiceless, which makes it most important for us to voice their concerns. To what extent have we as a society been able to do that? This is something upon which we'll be shedding light during the course of today's conversation. Overall, we'll be talking about the ever-evolving status of animal rights and animal welfare as it does exist in the Pakistani society. In this regard, we'll also be talking about the laws and policies which already exist in Pakistan so as to cater to various cases of animal abuse. We'll also be talking about the various government initiatives which have been taken by the government in a first in this regard. To name a few, we have seen that the government has introduced a chapter on animal welfare in the curriculum recently. To what extent can we expect this to be practically implemented? This is something upon which we'll be shedding light. More particularly, we'll also be talking about the national strategy which is in the process of being formed with regards to addressing the issue of mistreatments of animals at zoos. What breakthrough particularly has been made on this particular issue too, that is also something upon which we'll be shedding light. And last but not the least, we'll also be talking about the need for us to revamp and change our mindsets when it comes to approaching animals with more compassion, with more sympathy, and definitely with more empathy too. This and much more to follow on today's show, that too with a very diverse panel. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Ms. Zulfisha Anushe, who's an animal rights activist. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Alongside her, I have Dr. H.M. Umar, who's a vet physician and a surgeon. Assalamu alaikum sir and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. My third panelist for the show today is Ms. Atika Hassan, who is an animal rights lawyer. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Assalam. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. As an animal rights activist, how do you see this initiative? Do you feel that at a very basic level, it will help us inculcate those compassionate values, those empathetic values in our children?
Fatma, I honestly believe it's a great accomplishment. First of all, I'd like to, appreciate the steps of the recent government, the PM office, who has actively been taking all these initiatives whenever we have been tweeting or, any case that has been put forward for animal cruelty, animal abuse, be it the zoos or whatever, they have been very actively, responding to us. And this, specifically the curriculum is a great step, we're actually going in the right direction, I believe. Because school is the place, where we need to teach children the basic rights of animals.
And this is something which is not new. We do see it happening in other parts of the world. And I remember a few years ago, life skill based education, that was made a very important part of the curriculum too. So if you can inculcate things like life skill based education, why not animal welfare? But moving on, when we do talk about animal rights, we also understand the fact that unfortunately there's still that strata of the Pakistani society which does not accord that much importance to this area, saying there are so many other social issues that we need to talk about, there are so many other human rights abuses that we need to address. So why should we actually talk about animal welfare or animal exploitation? So as a very strong advocate of animal rights yourself, what was it that motivated you to follow this line? Because a lot of people in your place might not have done that.
I think it was, a turning point for me when my own pet dog was shot, and when I, started, going out, getting justice for my pet dog, and I realized that, we're far behind. They're not going to, take something legal about my dog. So, I need to start doing something. I will not take it, and I will start it, initiate this, the entire system for street animals, which is not there. And I think to some extent I have been successful.
Right. You've been leading a lot of petitions that way too, exactly. And then you've been working with the government as well, and then you've been working with the civil society too. And one thing which I have seen happening in Pakistan, that too for the better, is the fact that we have seen a lot of animal right activists voicing their concerns. We have seen a lot of work being done when it comes to protecting animals. So overall, how do you see the status of animals evolving over time?
I think we're going in the right direction, as I said earlier, because now we have support from the celebrities, we have support from the social media, we have support from the news channels, and I think this is helping us take our concerns to the higher authorities, to the government, and we're reaching with all this information. In fact, worldwide, globally, we're able to voice our concerns for the animals now. I think it is a great success, and I really hope things are actually being done. We're going in the right direction. I think it's a collective effort. I would not say someone specific is doing it. I think it's the activists, it's the animal shelters, it's the veterinary doctors, it's the media channels, it's the celebrities. It's a lot of these people with platforms like influencers. They play a very important role in talking about these issues related to animals. And now collectively we also successfully build pressures when we need something done, like just for the animals in zoos, the dog culling. So when we collectively raise our voices, I think we somehow make a point that we will not take this, we will not accept it. We need answers, and we will not stand injustice towards street animals.
Right, Zulfisha, on which I'll come to you, Dr. Saab, and here your narrative again becomes very important. We understand the fact that season to season, the disease burden with regards to animals, whether it's cats, whether it's dogs, or for that matter any other animal, that in itself varies, because there may be certain seasons in which we might see an influx of certain kinds of diseases. So as a vet, would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that. It is a saying in our veterinary field that winter for pets and summer for vets.
Right.
So disease incidence and their prevalences are higher in summer season compared with winters. And talking about what kind of diseases occur in summer season, well, there are skin diseases and there are gastrointestinal diseases. These two kinds of diseases are really very prevalent in this summer season.
Right, sir.
And above all, this heat stroke. And it's a really serious and life-threatening issue for be it's a pet animal, be it's a stray animal. Every animal is equally prone to get this heat stroke.
So that would be of interest to the audience, but here when we do talk about ailments, it's equally important that we talk about mental ailments too. Now, physical ailments, perhaps ailments like cancer or any other ailment, is easier to identify because you physically see the animal falling sick. But what about when they go in a depressive state of minds? What about when they contract a different kind of mental health diseases? How do you identify those?
Well, to identify this, the mental health of your pet, you have to get a very strong bond with your pet. If I'm not having a very strong bond with my pet, I'm unable to identify whether or not my pet is going through a mental trauma or mental stress.
Right.
Well, talking about how to identify this problem is, I will give you some tips. A mentally depressed animal would corner itself. The pet would not be showing any interest in, especially when it comes to the meal time. Dogs, especially if we talk about dogs, so they are given meals once daily or twice daily. Whenever it's their meal time, they won't be showing any interest in their food, and they may show aggression, and they may not be very playful, and they just get in a corner.
Right.
They are not social to you or any other family member, even to the person they are in very closest proximity with.
Right, Dr. Saab, on which I'll come to you, Atika, and here we must also of course talk about the various laws that Pakistan has so as to curb and of course so as to penalize this issue of animal cruelty as it does exist. Now in this regard, we understand the fact that the law of Pakistan, more particularly the statutory law, that dates back to 1890, which is of course the 19th century. Do you as an animal rights lawyer feel that this law in itself is enough so as to adequately address various animal right violations?
This law has never been amended since the 19th century, as you mentioned. And the biggest drawback in this law that there are no definitions. There are only 3 words that has been described in the definition. One is animal, one is street, and one is pook. It's a process for a female animal, which is obviously come under the animal cruelty. Now, considering this act is prevention for the cruelty against animals, cruelty, the word has not been defined. The act also defines some things where it says that it might be cruelty, but the cruelty itself is not defined. So, absolutely insufficient and inefficient law. At this time, law is just talk about general things about animals, and if you compare it with the laws of the other countries, especially the South Asian countries, you will see that this law, how outdated this law is.
In terms of the issues that it does talk about, its scope is limited. One, for example, it doesn't cater to the issue of dog culling. Two, for example, then it also doesn't categorically talk about the very much needed issue of not using animals for entertainment. So when we talk about the purview of this law, it one way or the other relates to exploiting animals through cruelty, whatever way that might be interpreted. But what about other forms of animal right violations that animals are subjected to? But when we talk about the penalties here, Ms. Atika, what are the penalties which are levied on those who actually abuse this law? Are they subjected to fines? Are they made to go to jails?
There are both type of penalties mentioned in this law, the fines as well as the imprisonment. For example, 100 rupee fine or a 500 rupee maximum fine, and the penalties would be 1 month jail, 15-day jail. Those are not sufficient. If you are subjecting an animal to cruelty or killing them or torturing them in any way, 100 rupee fine is not enough. You know how meager this is. Anyone can pay this penalty and go back and keep going whatever they were doing.
That's very rightly put by yourself, but here again, one thing that we do need to emphasize upon is the fact that the stricter the punishments, the more the element of deterrence in the people from steering clear of committing those particular crimes, on which I'll come to you, Zulfisha. When we do talk about various animal rights abuses, when we do talk about various animal rights exploitations, we have seen that in Pakistan at least there have been those of different kinds. Number one, there have been cases where we have seen reported cases of animal cruelty, which she very rightly so mentioned. Then we have seen cases of dog culling on a very surging high. Then we have seen cases of maltreatment basically towards animals in the zoos. But overall, if you were to analyze the most pressing challenges or issues which animals do face in the Pakistani society, what would those be?
I think number one, the basic stigma of them being, impure, the dogs. I think this is the biggest thing that they go through because the society is not ready to accept them. And other than that, dog culling is a major problem, and we as, animal shelters and animal activists, we feel that we fail when we see our own, neutered and spayed and vaccinated dogs being poisoned and shot. That has been happening, all over Pakistan, in Sindh, in Punjab and various other provinces.
In very posh areas of Lahore as well.
So I feel that is just terrible. That is how we also feel failed. So the government has to, take steps in order to finish and put a complete ban on the dog culling, especially the housing societies in the residential areas, because we have to constantly, be reminded, and we need to remember that we need to fight rabies. We need to kill rabies, not the dogs.
So basically, dog sterilization in itself is enough rather than resorting towards dog culling.
Exactly.
But here another very important issue on which I would want you to shed light is the recent incident of the elephant Noor Jahan, who actually passed away because of the neglect that she was subjected to in the zoo. Now, over a period of time, we have seen this zoo culture being basically an area of concern, being an area of criticism when it comes to animal welfare. As an animal rights activist, what do you feel needs to be done to address this issue? Should the momentum, should the policy initiative then come from the government in this regard, or do you feel at a very basic level it is the society which needs to be educated so as to be able to better treat animals, whether they are in zoos or outside zoos?
Give them a more natural and humane environment to be in, because we have seen the case of Noor Jahan. Just because he was stolen as a baby from some, jungle and brought to Pakistan and then being sold to the zoo along with her sisters. We have seen that she was just a teenager and she lost so many precious years of her life. Her life was reduced from 50 to 70 years to just 17 years. And recently, I, even just before coming here, I've seen the post-mortem report of Noor Jahan, and it really broke my heart. She had broken legs for more than 4 months.
Which actually suggests the fact that she had been subjected to neglect for such a long period of time, because neglect, if it continues for a long period of time, that of course becomes a very concrete case of abuse too. When we do talk about the very important role of vets like yourself, what is that ideal medical standard of care which people like yourself need to exercise exercise so as to ensure whenever animals are being kept in zoos, they are being given proper medical attention, and so that incidents like these, like that of Noor Jahan, they don't become a common occurrence, because over a period of time we have seen that this is perhaps not the first case. We have seen earlier on as well. I remember there were the cases of younger elephants who've also passed away because of higher levels of stress, because of obesity, and so many other medical issues. So can we not have that typical approach where we kind of make this a more of a preventive approach rather than curing it when it occurs?
We need to have more effective zoo management practices. We need to give them adequate space. We need to give them a very healthy diet. We need to have a regular check on the animals. I mean, the teams, the team members, the veterinarians, the staff, they already do this, but we have to do it in a better way. Capacity building of veterinarians and capacity building of the zoo keepers, animal handlers, it's really crucially important. And we need to have more and more trained veterinarians in our, especially zoo and wild animal veterinarians should be kept in panel. And we need to have up to mark veterinarians. We need to have international facilities. We need to have very effective and up to mark diagnostic facilities in our zoos. So we can diagnose the diseases in time and avoid such incidences in future.
Right, sir. Your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Atika. And here we understand there are a few laws in Pakistan which actually regulate the working of zoos. So tell us that what are those laws and what is the scope of such laws? How do they practically operate so as to regulate the working of zoos?
Okay, so there are two things I would like to mention here. There are a couple of laws. There is a Punjab Wildlife Act 1974, which is also a very old law that has never been updated. And then there is the Punjab Zoos and Safari Park rules, which has been amended up to 2017, but not significantly. So these laws are the ones that actually regulate the management and the functions and the processes that are, taken up in the zoo in regards to, again, the cruelty of animals. But what happens is that the rules are in place, the rules are in place. However, their implementation is not up to the mark or up to even if what's written in the act. For example, it specifically mentions that you are not to display a sick or an injured animal, but they are being displayed.
Right.
Just an example.
Right, Atika. But here we must also talk about the competing interests which do arise with regards to, at one end, ensuring that animal welfare, animal rights are taken care of, but at the other end also ensuring that economic development, or for that matter land development, that in itself is not impacted. So as a lawyer, as an activist yourself, how do you feel can such competing interests be balanced? Because at one end you have to protect the animals, but the other end you also have to do it in a manner which doesn't in one way or the other impede development of the country or land development, because if you're preserving their natural habitats, then this also has that natural consequence of one way or the other impeding land development too.
Right. So the motive behind should be that we have to also preserve our ecosystem. If we do not have an ecosystem, or we have a disturbed ecosystem, what are we developing our lands for? There should be certain areas that should be contained, or that should be out of all this land development, that should not be touched. For example, you have seen that we have Murray. It used to have a lot of trees. Then the trees were cut down in a huge quantity. The monkeys that were living there, the wildlife that was living there, they were coming up to the streets and the roads, and the humans were either torturing them or they were scared of them.
Right.
So that is the direct consequence of taking away the natural habitat of an animal.
Radhika, do you not feel that then this is just one part of addressing the problem? Another way to look at it would also be that whenever you do indulge in any kind of environmental or land development projects, you need to assess the cost benefit analysis of it, so as to see that does it or doesn't it not hamper the ecosystem or animals and humans, so to speak, on which I'll come to you. And here we must talk about the fashion industry too. Now in this regard, I was going over a report which which very categorically stated that in the country of Australia, 85% of the fur industry skin they come from animals who are caged in farms. Having said that, this in itself becomes a reason because of which a lot of people, especially animal lovers, they kind of not use these skins to start off with. So can we not expect people in Pakistan to do the same, especially when they know that something that they are using, a fashion accessory or otherwise, that has come at the cost of exploiting perhaps a particular animal?
You knew the exact figure and percentage of the number of animals that are used for these fur industry in Australia, but do you know about Pakistan? You don't, because there's no check and balance. There's completely no law to at least check and go through these factories and have a number or data that which brand is using what,
right,
which company is using what products. So that is how we have still been failing, and we lack here. So I think there has to be a proper system that identifies, and these products, these companies, these businesses, these brands need to add this thing in their websites and portfolios, that what they're using. Like I was just going through a website and getting some pillows. I was ordering some pillows online, and I found out in the description that the pillows were made with duck feather. And they did not mention on the website that they were selling cruelty free products, or their products are containing animal fur or anything, until you go in the depth. And when I started inquiring, inboxing them and everything, they blocked me. As for the fashion industry in Pakistan, just like they're doing so much globally and internationally, I think it's high time the fashion institutes guide and educate children about the alternatives, because there is synthetic leather, there is synthetic fur, so they should boycott these things that exploit animals and that involves the cruelty towards animals, and they should be choosing cruelty free products.
Right.
Even the eyelashes, the mink eyelashes,
exactly,
they come from a lot of cruelty. So I've never worn them. And there are synthetic options, but we need to stand up to this abuse and say no to these products.
Right, Zulfisha, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Dr. Saab, and here we must talk about this growing concern of dog bites as it does exist in the Pakistani society. So in this regard, what advice would you give to all the people out there, more particularly those who are subjected to the same and who do belong to the rural areas of the country, where they perhaps might not have that perfect access to the healthcare? What is it that they can do immediately so as to mitigate the damage? Because a lot of times we see that people living in remote villages of the country, they might not be able to go to an optimum hospital immediately.
We need to know first that not every dog is a rabid dog. If we've been bitten by a dog, we have to wash the bitten part of the body with tap water and wash the wound with the soaps, and we have to report to a medical facility immediately.
Right, sir, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Ms. Atika, and here we must also talk about the international obligations which are then placed on the Pakistani state so as to ensure that animal welfare is made a reality in the country. In this regard, it's very important to then mention the OIE, of which we understand that Pakistan is a member, and this OIE very categorically then says that there are 5 freedoms which must be given to animals. What are those freedoms, and to what extent do you feel our laws and policies comply with the same?
That is a very good question. So the fundamental 5 freedoms that OIE has mentioned, and they put a responsibility on every state, I read those out to you. Freedom from hunger and malnutrition, freedom from distress, physical and thermal discomfort, pain, injury and disease, and the last one is to express normal pattern of behaviors relevant to their kind or the other kind in the animal kingdom. So if we go back here, I'll give back the reference of the 2019 judgment by Justice Ataminullah that expresses all of these freedoms. And calling an animal a sentient being, actually these freedoms is what they are defining in that. So these are the needs that a human also require, and as well as the animal. Pakistani laws, somewhere or the other, there are various different laws that do, for example, the laws about the management of the zoos, the safaris and the zoos. It says that keeping the animal in their natural habitat, just as an example. Then they're supposed to be fed properly and on time. They're supposed to have a medical care. They're supposed to have comfort. These things are In laws, they are mentioned for the most part, other than the deficiencies that we have mentioned before. But the problem is with the implementation.
Right. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Zulfisha, and before we conclude today's show, it's very important that we talk about the need to make people aware about these various animal welfare laws, a very important part of which is, of course, to also implement them. So when it comes to public awareness, when it comes to public advocacy, what do you feel is the most effective mechanism to do the same?
I think in schools and in other, universities, we still talk about animals, but I think the place that needs to be targeted the most is schools and madaris, the religious institutions, because those are the places everyone is going to in our country. Even the people that are not, going to schools or don't have access to the educational system, they're still going to the mosques. So the scholars need to, use the Islamic references and the Quranic verses to educate people about the empathy and the love for animals that our own religion is.
That is so right. That is so right, because Islam is that one religion which emphasizes on being kind and compassionate towards animals. And in this regard, not only the religion itself, also the fact that the government has now actually brought in this first curriculum which actually talks about animal welfare. That in itself is also a very welcoming initiative. To which you wanted to add something, Atika?
Yes, I would actually, I was going to add just a point over what Zulfisha has said. Children are not the only segment in our society that need education and awareness on this issue. It's actually the adults that they need most needed and required awareness and education. For example, we talked about the animal critics who do not believe that they need that much freedom or that much facilities. The parents, the children, they learn from two places: their schools, their educational institute, or their home. If the parents are educated, if the society is educated, the children are going to pick that up themselves.
Right.
For example, we can use that zoos when they turn into sanctuaries as educational institutes for them.
Right. But here another point which also then stems from what you're saying is the fact that when it comes to parents' education, of course you can't send back the parents to school. Here a very important responsibility then lies on the media. The media has to basically ensure that people are educated, they are sensitized about animal welfare, and for that I feel that media itself needs to be literate
and civil society for that matter.
And civil society, because this is then a responsibility which falls on all stakeholders. Sir, I'll come to you, and before we conclude today's show, here it's equally important that we talk about the role of vets like yourself here when it comes to overall improving the quality of veterinary services in Pakistan and overall improving the standard and of course the quality of services which are rendered by people like yourself. What is it that we need to do here? Because a lot of problems also stem from the fact that number one, there perhaps might not be enough vets in Pakistan so as to address all these animal exploitation issues, and number two, even if we do have those vets, are they competent enough to do the task that they should be able to do?
Pakistan is short of vets, and we need to have more and more qualified veterinarians in the field, and above all we need to have more up to mark diagnostic facilities in the country, because this is the thing that hampers our ability to deal with animal disease and diagnostics. So to me, we need to have up to mark diagnostic facilities in our country. We have got very experienced and very competent farm animal and dairy vets and poultry vets in country, but when it comes to rural areas and the vets who are appointed in rural areas of the country, their competency regarding the dog and cat medicine and companion animal medicine is not up to mark. So we need to work on capacity building of such veterinarians in order to improve their skills, in order to cope up with these problems, the problems.
Right, sir, your point is noted. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Atika, and before we conclude today's show, here a very important responsibility also lies on the Pakistani media. What is it that the media here can do so as to educate people, so as to sensitize people about animal rights and animal welfare in the country?
We have seen the living example of Noor Jahan's, the turmoil she was going through. It was produced all over the media, and it was just a social media. So the media would be the social media, the traditional media, the TV, the movie, and the entertainment industry when it comes to the media. What they can do is produce more documentaries with more reference to the empathy towards animals and the interaction between the animal and the human. If you go on a social media, you will see a lot of media clippings and the reels and whatnot that is coming from abroad, where they show the human interaction with the animal interaction. If we show this, the people who are not children, who cannot go back to school, they will watch that, and they will probably and hopefully get some awareness on that.
And perhaps we can also, raise these issues via films, via theatre, whether movies, because we do see this happening with regards to other social issues. So we can actually do the same when it comes to protection of animals too. That's a point very validly made by yourself, on which note I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Ms. Zulfisha. Thank you so much, sir. And thank you so much, Ms. Atika, for your presence here today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about the ever-evolving status of animal welfare and animal rights as it does stand in the Pakistani society. In this regard, we also spoke about the various challenges which do come, of course, with animal exploitation and animal abuse. In this regard, whereas, of course, there is a very dire need to not only upgrade but also to implement the laws that we already do have in place, what is equally important is that we as a society learn to be more kind, we learn to be more compassionate, and we definitely learn to be more empathetic towards animals. On that note, signing off for today. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.